Good evening, Little Masters, and welcome to episode 148 of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where today, we're going to give Frodo a little extra time to rethink his decision to take the ring to Mordor.
A nice pickle he's landed himself in.
Yep.
But folks, we'll step into the common room here in just a moment. First of all, I'm Shawn Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the man of the West, who's landed us in a nice pickle, and I say that with relish, Alan Sisto.
Oh, man, that's awful. I did not approve of that pun. Just want to make sure that's clear for the record.
Didn't see it coming. We did not discuss that ahead of time.
No, we did not. My co-host's awful joke aside, I think you can probably guess that once again, we are going to be answering some more unscripted Q&A for you here today, folks. We have some of our patrons online with us here in the common room, and we've asked them to come with some of their very best questions. Now, as always, we have no idea what they're going to ask us, so Shawn and I are going to be answering questions on the fly in our 9th Questions After Nightfall episode.
Wow, we've been doing this for over 2 years now.
I
don't know what surprises me more, honestly, that we keep coming back for it or that you folks out there do. But no, the truth is it's always a great show. And as always, we're looking forward to this quarterly event where tonight it is our guests' business to ask questions and it's our business to answer them.
That's right. And as with previous Questions After Nightfall episodes, aside from possible edits for nervous coughs and time spent flipping through pages while we look for an answer, we will be presenting this as it was recorded live. Everything that you hear in the show will have been recorded during this session.
And if you'd like to get in on the next one, go check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/prancingponypod. We'll be doing Questions After Nightfall episodes every quarter, and we'll be inviting patrons at the Elrond's Honorarium tier and higher to join us.
It's just one of the many ways we're saying thank you to our patrons, giving them the opportunity to get to know us a little better, make us laugh, stump us, and, well, I was going to say occasionally, but I'd probably be more accurate if I said frequently embarrass us. In the best possible way, of course.
And we love it. We really do.
We do. Now, along the way, we'll be referencing as many books as we can to back up our answers. We've each got a few of the ebooks on our computers here with us.
You know, I've even got 1 or 2 physical books here in the booth with me just so I don't get caught off guard.
Good idea.
And since we get lots of questions from listeners about our sources, we want you all to remember that all the books we've mentioned on the show are linked in our show notes to each episode, as well as on the official library page of our website, theprancingponypodcast.com.
And, of course, there's a lot of other stuff on the website as well. Show notes, book links specific to each episode, outtakes, some of which are funnier than others, Prancing Pony Ponderings, and a few other little extras.
You'll also find a link to our new online storefront at teespring.com/stores/PPP. There you can find shirts, mugs, stickers, and all kinds of other great PPP gear.
I mean, where else are you going to find a pillow that says, "And Tulka slept"?
That was genius.
Absolutely.
That is one of my favorites. I've got one on every couch in my house.
There you go. But now why don't we go ahead and get started? Now, as we unmute you to ask your question, please let us know who you are and where you're from. Say hi to your fellow podcast listeners, and then we'll get to your question, all right?
Sounds great. Well, we're going to go ahead and start tonight with Ed. Ed, why don't you tell us what you got for us tonight?
Hey, guys. How's it going?
Going great.
All right, Ed. How about you?
I'm okay. I'm Ed. I'm the King of France. And I have a question for you.
All right.
Well, good. You're on a questions episode, so you're really in the right place.
So I'm a little bit confused about the rings, and I think it's a good time to sort of look back on the rings. Does Sauron hold the ringwraith's rings, or are the ringwraith's rings on the ringwraith's wraithy fingers? Because he didn't hold the dwarven rings, right? Because
right.
The dwarves had them, and some got destroyed by dragons, and some were lost.
He does hold some of them. He does hold some of them.
He's recovered them, but
he
didn't hold. Yeah, he got them back.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there's this question: is where are the rings? Because at the end of the Second Age, when Sauron was overthrown and the One Ring was taken, one would imagine that if Sauron held the ringwraith's rings, they would have been taken as well. Like if he had them on his person, or if he had them in, Barad-dûr or something like that. And so I'm kind of confused as to the ringwraith's rings, whether they're with Sauron or whether they're with the ringwraiths or what. And what do you guys think?
Well, Shawn, didn't we talk about this on a recent episode a little bit?
It's been a few months, but we did talk about it because I had always been of the opinion that the ring wraiths held their own rings, that they were wearing them themselves. And I think I got that from,
we must have disagreed.
I think you didn't correct me on the front end. A listener had to correct me on it, but there is something, maybe it's in the Council of Elrond or maybe it's in the Shadow of the Past, where Gandalf says that the ring wraiths have their own, but then it's in Unfinished Tales, and then it's in one of the letters where it's said that Sauron holds the rings.
Yeah, there's like 3 or 4 places where in the letters Tolkien makes clear that Sauron held the rings, and it was through his holding of the rings that he had power over the ring wraiths. Gandalf is the only one who says
otherwise. Yeah,
who says otherwise, but Tolkien himself says that Sauron holds them.
Right. And then you get into a question of, well, most people have just read the book, so most people who have just read The Lord of the Rings are going to believe Gandalf. But Tolkien, you know, if you go beyond the book and you go to the stuff Tolkien wrote about it, which we do all the time.
Well, right.
That's where he clarifies that the ring wraiths did not have them.
I thought, didn't we talk about it when we talked about the Dwarven rings, you know, when it maybe in an episode that hasn't released yet? Wasn't it when we talked about
it might have come up again. No, it might have come up again, but we originally discussed it back in book 1. I think I said something to the effect of, you know, when we were talking about how all evil things were drawn out during this time.
Right.
And I think I said something about the ring wraith coming through with his ring, and all the things in the old forest started getting awakened. I think that was the episode where I brought it up. And it was a listener who came back to us later and said, no, that's actually not the case. In Unfinished Tales, which I've got the Unfinished Tales text in front of me, as well as in one of the letters, Tolkien does say that that Sauron held the rings. But I'm trying to find the passage in Lord of the Rings where
Gandalf
says
the
opposite. Yeah. Now that's interesting. In Shadow of the Past, Gandalf says the 9 he has gathered to himself.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't make it clear whether he's actually holding them. So it's at the Council of Elrond. Frodo basically says, hey, I want to know what Gandalf's been up to. And Galdor says, yes, I do too. Gandalf jumps in and he says, the 9 the Nazgul keep, the 7 are taken or destroyed. At this Glowin stirred but did not speak. The 3 we know of, what then is this one that he desires so much? So he says the 9 the Nazgul keep. That's where I think most of us get the idea that the Nazgul have their own rings. Did you find the letter by any chance?
It's letter 246, that Sauron, who still through their 9 rings, which he held, had primary control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's the weird thing. He says in Shadow of the Past that the 9 he has gathered to himself, but then later in the Council of Elrond, he says the 9 they keep. And that's the later one. So I think, you know, one could be forgiven for being left with the idea that the Nazgul keep their own rings. But as you said, letter 246... Tolkien says that that Sauron held them, and then
the Unfinished Tales,
in the Hunt for the Ring, it says, at length he resolved, and he's talking about Sauron, at length he resolved that no others would serve him in this case but his mightiest servants, the ring wraiths, who had no will but his own, being each utterly subservient to the ring that had enslaved him, which Sauron held. Yeah.
And then later on he says that the ring wraiths, quote, were entirely enslaved to their 9 rings, which he now himself held.
There you go, yeah.
So you know, we've got multiple points where Tolkien's making it clear that Sauron holds those rings, and the only time where he suggests otherwise is when Gandalf says at the council.
Yeah, which unfortunately is the one that everybody remembers, myself included.
Exactly. But then we have another bit that's more of a let's get an answer from nothing. This is absence of evidence, but it still actually makes the argument. It's in A Knife in the Dark. Frodo sees the true appearance of the Nazgul. Here's the text. He was able to see beneath their black wrappings. There were 5 tall figures, 2 standing on the lip of the dell, 3 advancing. In their white faces burned keen and merciless eyes. Under their mantles were long gray robes. Upon their gray hairs were helms of silver. In their haggard hands were swords of steel. Their eyes fell on him and pierced him as they rushed towards him. Nothing about the rings. Now,
Doesn't
I know
say anything about rings. That's a good point.
Arguing from absence of evidence, but there's no evidence that there are rings, and Frodo would see them. There's no doubt Frodo would see them. They would be glowing probably more so than any other part of their body.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to me that, again, they don't have them. They aren't wearing them.
Yep.
At the time. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. So yeah, there are a lot of places where it's said that Sauron has them. And that place
Yeah,
that
and
Alan
only
just
the
mentioned,
one.
where it says that the ring wraiths, like you said, arguing from
Mhm.
absence of any evidence, but I think that's telling. But yeah, and
I think so too.
yeah, I think so. There's really only the one place where Gandalf says that the 9 the Nazgul keep, and again, unfortunately, that is the one that a lot of us that seems to stick with a lot of us. But
It really does, yeah. And I think, we do see that when there are multiple answers to one question in the text, it is really hard to sort through that and identify which one's the real answer. But I think in this case, it's pretty clear that they were being held by Sauron.
so I think we've got a follow-up. Is that a follow-up from Ed?
Yeah, he's just asked in the text, why were they not captured after Sauron's downfall? Because he put them in a safe deposit box?
Are we talking about the rings or the...
Yeah. Because they hacked the one ring off of his finger, so why didn't they get the 9 rings? I would honestly probably because they didn't know where they were. He probably didn't hold them in his pocket. He just held them in some place that was safe and out of reach of the Nazgul, on a real tall shelf.
Or did he let them have the rings in the Second Age, and he only gathered them to himself in the Third Age?
Maybe he didn't gather them until then. That could be true too. Yeah,
Because
we don't know when he gathered them.
I have to think that if he was gone while he was taking his little
Sabbatical.
yeah,
Yeah.
his little sabbatical in the void,
A little leave of absence. Yeah, exactly.
Not
he goes to
literally in the
Morgoth's
void,
HR department and says, "I'd like to take a year sabbatical. An age-long sabbatical,
Right.
please."
Yeah, no, I have to believe that after Sauron fell at the Last Alliance, I think before that he must have given the rings to the ring wraiths. They must have been holding them at that time, because if they weren't, then when Sauron fell, I think the ring wraiths themselves would have been destroyed.
Right. If the 9 rings were,
I can't prove that. If the one ring was still out there, maybe they wouldn't. But I would think that the Nazgul,
they wouldn't have any power certainly to rebuild.
Yeah.
To kind of
to rebuild
do
Minas
things in
Morgul
his
and all those
stead.
things that they did.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I do tend to think that they probably had them during the Second Age, and Sauron gathered them in the Third Age. But
that's a pretty reasonable conclusion to reach. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
And it makes me only half wrong about my earlier assumption.
We love answers that make you only half wrong.
So,
they're rare, but
they are rare. Yeah,
that's true. All right. So who's up next for us, Shawn?
All right. Well, next up we have got Demay.
Oh wow, Demay from Alaska. Welcome.
Hi, this is Demay. Actually, I live north of the hill Karaksa, and it is very, very icy and cold here. And I think that the last time I talked to you guys, I was mentioning that I was rereading the Silmarillion because it just seemed to be the season to do that. And so, actually, yesterday I was in the chapter of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. And they were mentioning about how after Numenor sank, that where the boats were swept to, and Isildur and Anarion were swept to an area that they traveled up the Anduin, and there they built cities. And one of the things it mentioned, just kind of almost as a throwaway in the sentence, even not even the paragraph in the sentence, and it said, there they built their cities as a shield against the wild men of the Dales. And I immediately, when I read that, I said, it's not capitalized. And I said, Dale? I thought those were civilized people.
Yes.
And so who are these wild men of the Dales? Where are the Dales? Who are those wild men? He doesn't give any more information about it. That's my question.
That's a very good question. Shawn, I'll go ahead and start with that. Of course, the word dales in that sense, since it's not capitalized, we're just talking about a dale. So we're talking about a valley or a broad valley. So we just need to look and see, okay, where might some valleys be near the feet of Mount Mindalawan? We're talking about the men who we would later see in the wild men of Dunland. These are going to be lower men. They're not middle men like the men of Rohan. These are not descended from any men of Numenor.
Some of them did have some of the Haladin blood in them. But I think it is one of those situations where they're mingled with folks who are not Edain, and so they're generally wild men.
Right, the Dunlandings.
Yep. I think you're on the right track. I think those are the wild men we're looking at here.
Yeah, I think we are.
We're talking specifically about Minas Anor and Minas Anor is Minas Tirith.
Minas
Anor and Minas Ithil.
Right.
Actually, no, it's specifically Minas Anor.
Minas Anor, the Tower of the Setting Sun.
At the feet of Mount Mindalluin as a shield
Mindalluin.
against the wild men of the Dale. So it's got to be the wild men to the west of them. So yeah, I definitely think it is the Dunlendings.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it's the Dunlendings.
The Dunlendings, a sullen folk akin to the ancient inhabitants of the White Mountain Valleys, whom Isildur cursed. They had little
White
love
Mountain
of
Valleys,
Gondor.
there's your Dales right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep, there you go. They had little love of Gondor, but though hardy and bold enough, were too few and too much in awe of the might of the kings to trouble them, or to turn their eyes away from the east, whence all their chief perils came.
There you go.
So
and we get a little bit more description of them as well in the history of Galadriel and Celeborn. There's a bit here about that in Enedwaith, the remnants of the Dunlendings lived in the east, in the foothills of the Misty Mountains.
One more little bit about the Dunlendings and the citadels of Gondor. It says later in that paragraph I was just reading from, the bounds of Gondor were the Eisen and the Gap of Calenarthon, as it was then called, which later became the Gap of Rohan. The gap was watched by the fortresses of Aglarond, the Hornburg, and Angrenost, Isengard. And the fords of Isen, the only easy entrance to Gondor, were ever guarded against any incursion from the wild lands. So that tells us right there that it was incursions from that area to the west of the Gap of Rohan, which is Dunland. That was the area where Gondor was being attacked from in those early days. Right. So that is completely consistent with the idea that that's who they were protecting themselves against, was the Dunlendings.
Right. Well, it looks like DeMay has a follow-up. What do you have for us?
I was wondering about Hanbury Han's people with their little poison darts. Were those the ones that they were afraid of? That's immediately where my mind went when I read this. Although I like the information you're doing.
I can understand why, because of course, geographically they're in that area. But I think, we find that the Pukul men were more closely related to they were in the likeness of the Druidine.
Yeah, the Druidine. Yeah, that's
which are different than the wild men.
Yes, although interestingly, they were also among the Haladin. But
that's true.
They were always said to be like
they were a
people apart. Exactly.
They were a people apart. Yep. So there were definitely connections between the Haladin and the Druidine, but they were not the same people. They did not mix. The Druidine were a different race of people altogether, significantly different, physiologically.
Right.
So no, those were different. Those are not the wild men. The wild men simply would have been ordinary humans, but not descended from the men of Numenor. Interesting though that they were descended from the Haladin. I didn't remember that, so. That's interesting.
Yeah, either descended from, or maybe they were cousins of. But I know that they were related to them.
Yeah,
it may, now that I'm thinking about it, it may have been a situation where the Dunlendings and the Haladin were descended from the same proto group.
Oh yeah,
but I'm not sure about that off the top of my head. And that does seem like a really long stretch of time.
Yeah, you're right. They were both from the same ancestors. The ancestors of the Dunlendings were also the ancestors of the Haladin. And this is again according to Tolkien Gateway, and I'd have to see where they sourced that information. It looks like it might have been from the peoples of Middle Earth, but again, I'd have to double check that. So without double checking that, I can at least tell you that is what another source tells us, that they were descended from the same source. Okay, well, I think that'll answer that one. Who's up next for us, Shawn?
Okay, next up we've got Jim.
All right, Jim, are you able to hear us?
I can hear you fine. This is Jim from Maryland. I'm just north of Annapolis, and I don't like to brag, but I knew Linda Lay back when she was Linda Johnson.
Oh, that is officially really bad.
That's wonderful.
I knew Linda Lay back.
We went to high school together at PS 127 in Aresia before she met Jim Lay, and they got married. Now she's Linda Lay.
I never thought Jim was good enough for her. Did you?
That's just bad.
She could have done better.
So bad. All right. I hope your question is better than your pun. No, actually, that was really brilliant.
That was brilliant.
I said hesitantly.
I approve.
We always mock the Hobbit movies for the fact that everything seems to be 45 minutes away from each other. I mean, you can go from the stronghold of the orcs to the Lonely Mountain back to Mirkwood.
Only if you ride the giant public worm transport system.
That's true, but even by horseback from Dol Guldur, it's like 45 minutes. So, but that brought to mind, going back to Fall on the Barrow Downs when Frodo was trapped by the barrow with the barrow wight. He suddenly remembers the tune that he was told to sing. So he sings a quatrain, and then quoting here, there was a sudden deep silence in which Frodo could hear his heart beating. After a long, slow moment, he heard plain but far away an answering point singing. And then Tom Bombadil sings his 4 lines, and then suddenly there's a loud rumbling sound, and there he is.
Right.
How did he get there? How did he get there that quickly? I mean,
it's like the Kool-Aid Man.
Either
right.
he has some sort of a Star Trek reporter ability, or he was just hanging out the next barrow down over, just waiting for these guys to get trouble, and just appeared magically at the same moment. And I have to confess, the first time I ever read Lord of the Rings, and Sam and Frodo are in a real fix in the Mountains of Shadow, and it looks like all hope is lost, I was half expecting Sam to start singing for Tom Bombadil, because I couldn't see any other way they were going to get out of that mess. That didn't happen. They figured out some other way. But I'm just wondering, how did Tom get there that quickly?
Wow.
Well,
that's a really interesting question, isn't it,
It is
Shawn?
a really good question. I mean, I guess aside from the obvious answer that nobody's going to want, which is that Tom is magic, I don't know.
It's magic, you know.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. No.
Sorry. Would you rather I sing the Cars version?
Or Strange Magic by ELO, maybe?
That could work. There you go. Okay.
We could do
And that certainly works. I'm not going to be able to sing that off the top of my head, though. Anyway.
So, no, I know that's not a good answer for anybody. I'm looking at the map at loaderproject.com, which is where I usually go when I'm, want something, want some help with something like this. And,
right.
The Barrow Downs are right next to the old forest. Not only is it the place the hobbits went to immediately after they left Tom, but it really is right next to it on the map. But there's no scale or anything here on the map to tell me how far that is.
The problem is, unless it's like 200 yards, I mean, unless the Barrow Downs, especially the ones where Barrow White was hanging out, are, within a few hundred yards at the most of where Tom lived, there is no rational explanation that says how he could just show up within seconds. So I think the answer lies...
Or is it possible that they actually are within his realm? Are they somehow within the realm that he controls, or at least has...
That could be, and that would certainly explain a quick arrival. But I think the answer may lay in the explanation of after a long moment. We don't know how long that moment is. Frodo doesn't know how long that moment is. And it could have been an hour. It could have been 2 hours. We just don't know. And the thing is, when you're experiencing something like that,
you don't have any concept of time.
You have no concept of time. You might as well have been under some sort of anesthesia. I mean, you just simply don't know. And my thought is that, I mean, that's got to be what it is. The moment that he's there and he sings the song, how does it describe it again? There was a sudden deep silence in which Frodo could hear his heart beating. After a long, slow moment, he heard plain but far away as if it was coming down through the ground. And then he's hearing Tom. That long, slow moment might have been half an hour, 2 hours, 6 hours. We don't know. It seems clear that there was some sort of, supernatural impact on Frodo at that point. So I would go with something like that really the time that passed was a lot longer than Frodo might have believed. That's one simple explanation.
That is an explanation, although I don't know, that's
sort of an Occam's razor. That's sort of an Occam's razor moment, though. It's like everything else is.
Well, I mean, it's possible. It is possible that Frodo just completely loses track of time. I guess I would think even 10 minutes is more than a moment to me. And even if you don't know how long it is, it feels longer than a long,
but what if you're in
moment.
some sort of a dream state or a fugue state? I mean, that's the thing. I'm thinking here,
Maybe.
Frodo he's in the world of the dead at this point, right? I mean, he's in the realm of the dead or the undead, and time is going to have a very different flow. So he experiences,
that is a possible explanation. Yeah, I'll give you that may be it. I tend to think it is something to do with the Barrow Downs being within or adjacent to the realm that Tom controls, because we know that Tom doesn't go beyond his own borders.
No, and it is in his own realm, because he talks about not going onto the road into Bree, right? When he gets to the hobbits after this, and he walks them the rest of the way through the barrows, he gets to the road and he says, "I'm going to stop here. My kingdom stops here." So the Barrow Downs are part of his territory.
They are within his realm.
Yeah,
they are. That's right. You're right about that. So I think I'm leaning towards that. I think Tom is the master within his own realm. Right. I think he sees and he hears all, just by nature of his natural Tomness.
By his natural Tomness, I love that.
His Bombadil magic, and I think that's where I'm going with this one. I think he hears them because it's within his realm, and he sees and hears all that passes within his realm.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I'm trying to see if I can find the actual text that says that about, this is the end of my land.
Tom's country ends here. He will not pass the borders.
There it is.
Tom has his house to mind, and Goldberry is waiting. Yep.
It's in song. That's why I'm looking. I'm like scrolling through all the prose going, well, he's not saying anything. And then Tom's country ends here.
With right. Tom, there's always a 50-50 chance. Whatever he said was in song. Yeah.
That's right. That is absolutely right. But yeah, I think you're looking at some sort of combination of those two or one or the other. Obviously the more practical answer is Frodo didn't know how much time had passed, but the much more fun answer is, of course, Tom has power here. It's his kingdom. He can do all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Including, like I said, showing up through the wall of the barrow like the Kool-Aid Man.
That's right.
Hey.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That was a good Kool-Aid Man. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll leave that in. So there you have it. Some great answers, or maybe not, depending on your perspective, but enough that we can move on to the next question. Shawn, who's next?
Very good stuff. And coming up next, we've got Rose. Before we get to Rose's question, we want to remind you about our sponsor here at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
You know what could be a good last-minute holiday gift? Super comfy Bombas socks. Look, most people don't ask for socks, but that's only because they haven't worn Bombas.
Bombas socks are really soft, as in made with the softest cotton in the world soft.
And their socks have this amazing built-in arch support that's just right. It's like a nice hug for your feet.
And you do a lot of different things, so Bombas makes a lot of different socks. Dress socks for work, performance socks for working out, and even limited edition holiday socks. My favorite are the merino wool socks. They're like magic. Soft, warm, naturally moisture-wicking, and never itchy or rough.
And you know that person who's just a gift enigma, completely impossible to shop for? Well, Bombas is the gift that even that person will love. Everybody will.
So go to bombas.com/PPP and save 20% off your first purchase using our promo code. That's BOMBAS.com/PPP for 20%. Bombas.com/PPP.
And thanks again to Bombas for partnering with us on this. Now, let's get back to our listener questions. Hi, Rose.
Hi. So I'm Rose from Colorado.
Welcome, welcome. And it's your first time with us on Questions After Nightfall, huh?
Yes, it is. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you.
We're excited to have you. Thank you for joining us.
So I actually have a question about Frodo and the Ring.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been rereading The Lord of the Rings, and I was thinking about the end scene where Gollum falls into Mount Doom, right, with the ring on.
Mm-hmm.
But he takes the ring from Frodo by force.
Yes.
And then he falls in, and then nothing happens to Frodo. He doesn't lose his mind. He comes back. He's the same.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, Gandalf talks about how, you can't let it go. If you take it from somebody by force,
break their
it
mind.
would break their mind. So is it Frodo's not affected because the ring being destroyed essentially destroys Sauron? Or is there some other reason why Frodo gets away with unscathed, essentially?
Right. Why is his mind not entirely broken at that very moment? That's a very good question, Rose. I like that one a lot. But Shawn, I think we might have an answer for that, don't we? We just talked about,
I feel like we did talk about this recently. I don't know.
Shawn, why don't you go ahead? I think I've got some answers that I want to look up, but let me have you start and see what you have to say.
Okay. Well, I think the first thing is I want to make a really fine distinction in what Gandalf says. I actually pulled up that text. And Gandalf actually says, already you too, Frodo, and I'm not doing my Gandalf voice, sorry. Already you too, Frodo, cannot easily let it go, nor will to damage it. And I could not make you, except by force, which would break your mind. The way I read that is Gandalf is saying he cannot make Frodo give up the ring by force, because that would break his mind. Make Frodo give up the ring, make Frodo hand it over, make Frodo destroy it. He cannot force Frodo to unwillingly give it up, but to act, to perform some action that's going to give it up. What Gollum does is something different. Gollum doesn't force Frodo to give him the ring. Gollum takes it from him violently.
Forced to give versus force taking, right.
Yeah, I like that. Forced to give versus forced taking. I think that's what Gandalf is talking about. Gandalf is talking about some sort of coercion of Frodo to make him give up the ring, and that would break his mind, because Frodo is being forced to do something, that the ring has such a strong hold on him that it's, that's what's going to break his mind. It's going to be the force of Gandalf versus the force of the wings.
And Frodo caught in the middle, and
force
his
of the
mind
rings
would
will,
just break.
and Frodo caught. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's what Gandalf is talking about. What Gollum does is actually take the ring from Frodo. Just completely bites his finger off. And so Frodo is not forced to comply with that in any way, willingly or unwillingly. It's just taken from him.
Yeah, it's just what is, right. It's not, he doesn't have to make a decision that breaks his mind. Yeah.
Right. I think the answer lies
good.
somewhere in that distinction. But Alan, you said you had something from one of the letters that might
shed a little light
on
We actually
this.
talked about this on an episode that hasn't aired yet. We recorded it, but it hasn't aired. And it was talking about the moment in the Council of Elrond when we get that wonderful fate versus free will, how the task has been appointed, but you're going to take it freely. And we looked at a letter, number 246, from Drafts to a Letter to Eileen Elgar. She comments about Frodo's failure to surrender the ring at the Cracks of Doom and Gollum biting it off his finger. Tolkien has this to say. He says, I don't think that Frodo's was a moral failure. At the last moment, the pressure of the ring would reach its maximum. Impossible, I should have said, for anyone to resist, certainly after long possession, months of increasing torment, and when starved and exhausted. Frodo had done what he could and spent himself completely as an instrument of providence, and had produced a situation in which the object of his quest could be achieved. His humility with which he began and his sufferings were justly rewarded by the highest honor, and his exercise of patience and mercy towards Gollum gained him mercy, with a capital M Tolkien used there. His failure was redressed. I wouldn't be surprised if there was an element of your mind is going to be broken if the ring is taken from you. If there is that element, that it's prevented here by that providence, because Frodo acted as an instrument of providence in the first place, putting himself at risk in order to do this task that was appointed and to do it freely. So to me, I see that even if there is that, he's sort of protected because of the purpose with which he took this task on. But I like
that
yours
could
too.
be. Let
I really like yours.
Well, let me
better.
ask you about that though, because is it possible that that mercy could be operating through, let's say, like a less miraculous means, through a more mundane means of like, well, part of the mercy is Frodo is not going to have his mind broken because he's not going to be forced to give up the ring. The ring is going to be separated from him in a way that would not break his mind, and that's part of the mercy.
That could.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It could go either way.
It could. Yeah, I could see how both of the two answers could be reconciled. Yeah. I do like the way you put that the difference between having to make a mental decision and to assent, to agree to give up the ring. And in so doing, you destroy your own mind because it has such a hold on you, versus having it simply ripped from your body where you have nothing to say about it. And of course, he wasn't the same after that. I mean, he didn't lose his mind, but he was never the same.
Oh, he was certainly traumatized.
Which is why he ended up, going to the West so much earlier. So that may be the mercy that we're talking about here in this text, too.
That's definitely an added mercy. Yeah,
that's the big version of it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Now, and Rose has actually just commented in the chat that I guess Gollum didn't lose his mind when Bilbo takes the ring. So why would Frodo, when Gollum takes it from him?
That would certainly fit with your answer. The idea that the ring is taken, but he hasn't had to make the decision to give it up.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, Bilbo had to make the decision to give it up, but he wasn't forced. Right. I think that's the whole thing. Gandalf talks about, like, if I forced you to change your mind, which, I mean, I don't know how he would do that. Maybe it would require some sort of magical convincing, and that would indeed break your mind. I don't know.
Yeah.
But it's a good question. It's a really good topic, and I have a feeling we'll
it is
probably
a really
be
good
revisiting
question.
that again.
It is a really good question, and one that I've actually heard before. Yeah, I've heard people ask that same question, so I think it's worth bringing up. So, thank you, Rose.
All right, Shawn, you said the next question was Simon's, right?
That's correct.
All right, Simon, welcome.
Hey, this is Simon from Charlotte, North Carolina.
Welcome.
Welcome, Simon.
Yeah, so I got a bit of a softball for you guys, just to change it up a little bit.
We like softballs.
Yeah.
All right.
So after listening to the podcast for coming up on a year now, and finally being caught up, y'all have really enlightened my opinions and ideas about quite literally everything Tolkien related.
Great.
So
wonderful. That's great. Thank you.
Yeah. So while it's been just extremely rewarding to be a listener and community member of the PPP, my question to you is, what has been the most rewarding aspect of doing the podcast for you guys?
Oh, wow. Wow, Shawn, that is a fun question. I'm looking forward to answering this one. Thank you, Simon. That's a great question. And not just because it actually has readily available answers we don't have to research.
Yeah. Yeah. Top of my head.
It's just a lot of fun. Well, Shawn, I'm going to go ahead and let you start.
I think the most rewarding thing for me is meeting so many like-minded Tolkien fans all over the world.
Yeah.
And just being able to talk to people all over the world about Tolkien and see how other people experience Tolkien.
Mm-hmm.
I live in the States. I live in a pretty nerdy city, but even where I live, there's just not that many Tolkien fans out there. It's not one of the geek properties that has just, I don't know. It's not quite the household discussion topic that it was, even 10,
that's true. Back
20 years ago
out.
when the movies were big. Yeah. And yet it's been something I've been passionate about for so long. And it's really great to be plugged into a community that is discussing it, that's thinking about these books all the time. And again, to talk to people about it all over the world and to have something to contribute to that discussion, to have something that I can give back to the community that people seem to enjoy and that people seem to like sharing and talking about, and that is sparking new discussion. So yeah, that's it for me.
And I have to line up really with the same thing. And I hate doing that because it would have been nice to disagree on this one. But no, really, meeting all these people all around the world. I mean, it was neat. Our first opportunity was actually when we met each other at Mythmoot. It was episode 88. First chance we finally had to actually, meet face to face. Like, oh, hey, Shawn, you look just like I thought you would. Good to see you, man. I mean, it was really nothing. It was like seeing an old friend that, I'd known for years, just hadn't been around in a while. But, and we got to meet a lot of people there, and that was neat. But I have to say, meeting folks at Oxenmoot and then meeting folks at Tolkien 2019, you get such a rich experience talking to people all around the country and then all around the world. And you realize just how much the Tolkien community is special. Mm-hmm. How all ages, all cultures,
just all sorts of people,
languages, ages, ethnicities, everything. It just doesn't matter. If you're a Tolkien fan, you're a Tolkien fan, and you're absolutely part of the family.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the thing that I'm amazed at constantly. And to think that we're a part of that in a way that
in a way that's doing something, right? In a way that's like,
we're bringing people together.
Yeah.
We're bringing people together. One of these days, we're going to hear about two people came to see us at a conference and they met and developed a lifelong friendship or got married and had a family or something. I mean, it's going to be somehow we've done a show that's brought people together in every imaginable way. And it's such an honor, such a privilege. And that's really, I think, the thing for us that stands out.
Yeah, so, definitely. Yeah. And, you talk about this community and how it always feels like family, that's the really thing that has struck me so much. The 3 moots that I've been to, it always feels like coming home. I've done sci-fi conferences. I've done comic conferences. I've done writing conferences, and I've done conferences for my day job. I've done, all kinds of
I've done conferences about conferences.
right. Yeah. But, the one place that never felt like work was going to a Tolkien conference, going to a
Absolutely.
Moot.
I agree.
And that's despite the fact that we have worked very hard at those things,
Oh yeah, we have worked very hard. My goodness. Very, very hard. But yeah, I've done photography conferences and Photoshop stuff and VO stuff and VO close. There's a kind of camaraderie there, but nothing like this, nothing like family. And that's what this feels like. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. The first time we actually did meet in person at Mythmoot, I remember people talking to us all through that conference saying, so what was it like to finally meet each other in person?
Right, right.
Did you guys actually get along, or do you secretly can't stand each other? The truth was, we've spent so much time together on the podcast that we're just old friends. I mean, we were just old friends, even though we'd never met in person. And in some ways, that actually was really cool because it was kind of a prelude to going to a place like Mythmoot or like Tolkien 2019 and suddenly meeting all these people that we've been talking to online for years and finally meeting them.
Where I feel like I'm meeting a long lost family member, I'm meeting old cousins that I'd never met before.
Yeah.
It's really kind of what it feels like when I meet these people.
And you see somebody and you're like, before a word comes out of their mouth, you know who it is because you've seen their face online.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool.
Anyway, it really is neat. I love that. That's great stuff.
Long answer to that question, but it's a great question.
Well, it was a great question. Deserved a long answer. All right, Shawn. So who's next up?
All right. Well, next up, we've got Kevin.
All right, Kevin, welcome.
Hey, everybody. My name is Kevin, and I'm from Oakboro, North Carolina.
Right on.
Hello, Kevin.
North Carolina is well represented tonight.
Yeah, just out here in the middle of nowhere. My question is a Fëanor question, so I'm sorry because I know you guys aren't big fans of him.
Okay. Get out the knives, get out the bats,
Yep.
Right. But it's actually about the scene where the trees have been destroyed and they're asking to basically destroy one of his gems to get the light from it.
Right.
And I was curious because there's a line there where he says, it would break my heart. And I was curious if you guys thought basically that he was being literal, like, how elves can die from grief, or if he
says he would be,
maybe, right? And then, or maybe like a literal thing as in the way that if you destroy Sauron's ring and you destroyed one of those things, it would kill him in that way. Or,
they poured so much of his essence into their creation. Okay. That's a good question, Shawn. Let me go back to that passage, and I will. I'll read it real quick, and then we'll take it from there. But Fëanor spoke then and cried bitterly, "For the less, even as for the greater, there is some deed that he may accomplish but once only, and in that deed his heart shall rest. It may be that I can unlock my jewels, but never again shall I make their like. And if I must break them, I shall break my heart, and I shall be slain, first of all the Eldar in Aman." So as I read that, I hear a couple things. In that deed, his heart shall rest. And then he says, I shall break my heart if I had to break them. That's the first thing. So clearly his heart is resting in this creation of his. But then you get this, and I think this might be key to the whole thing. It may be that I can unlock my jewels, but I can never do it again. And if I must break them, I'll break my heart. He doesn't even know if he can. I would argue that he doesn't know what the results would be if he did. If he doesn't know whether he can do it, he doesn't know what will happen if he does do it.
Yeah.
I mean, is it fair to say that Fëanor is one who speaks a little, hyperbolic at times? Yeah, he's kind of a little grandiose in his descriptions of things.
I think every one of the Noldor that he convinced to cross the Helcaraxë and go after Melkor probably speaks to the fact that he speaks hyperbolically.
Yeah, which is why they were all besotted with wine and briefly.
Yeah.
That's the thing. I think here it's a little hyperbolic would be my initial hunch. What about you, Shawn?
I don't know. I don't know if it's hyperbolic. I don't think that it is a literal connection between his heart and the Silmarils. I don't think that he has the ability to put his essence in, put his power, which is basically what Melkor does with Arda and what Sauron does with the ring. He does not. He's an incarnate. He's not an Ainu, and he doesn't have the ability to put his power into a physical object in that way. And so
I agree.
I definitely don't think there's any kind of literal connection that breaking them will literally kill him. And I think that is backed up by the fact that he says, it may be that I can unlock my jewels. If he thought that he had put his essence into them and it would kill him, he would say, I can't unlock my jewels because it would kill me.
Right.
And then right after that, he does say, and if I must break them, I shall break my heart. He doesn't say, if I break them, it will break my heart. He says, if I must break them, if I am forced to do this thing I don't want to do, it is going to break my heart figuratively, the way we would say something breaks our heart.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that it's not a literal magical power, whatever word you want to use, connection.
Right, like the foundations of Barad-dûr being built on the ring, and the ring's destroyed and the tower falls. Right. This isn't like that.
It's not that. It may be that being forced to break them would cause him enough grief that he would die. He comes from the sort of the prime example of death by grief in Tolkien's world is Fëanor's mother
certainly
Miriel.
The first, yeah.
And so I definitely think he's capable of that. I could see him succumbing to grief in that way, I guess I would say.
I could.
So I don't know that he's being hyperbolic when he says that he will die, but I think it would be more a matter of death from grief, as Kevin said, as opposed to like an actual connection. Yeah.
And I can see that too. I mean, I know I'm saying that he is hyperbolic and he does exaggerate, and he does.
He does.
But that doesn't change the reality that this could, cause him enough grief that he would, as his mother did, choose to give up his body, to choose to die. That it wouldn't be an unavoidable reaction, but that he would be so grief-stricken that he would choose
He would choose to die. Yeah.
To have his Fëa separate from his Hroa. Yeah.
That's a very good point. He would not die from grief unwillingly. If this happens and he feels this grief, he would still be making a choice to die from grief, which is what his mother did.
And I think that's given here in the text when he says, I shall break my heart, not my heart shall be broken.
Oh, that's a good point.
It's not it's not a neutral thing. This is first person active. I will do this thing if this happens.
Yeah.
So
I guess I was linking that to, I guess there's a couple of ways you could read that. You could also read that as, if I'm the one to break them, then in doing so, I will also break my heart.
Yeah, I can see that. But either way, it's an active decision.
Either way, it's an active decision, and it would be an active decision to shuffle off the mortal coil if that's what he chose to do,
Right. Or to shuffle off this serially longevity coil.
Very, very well said.
Yeah.
So maybe not hyperbolic in that sense, but it's definitely melodramatic.
Yes. Well, Fëanor is nothing if not melodramatic.
Yeah. So even if he's not being hyperbolic in saying this, he's still being a bit of a drama queen.
Yeah. Well, that's a big shock.
Yeah.
Color me surprised.
Yeah.
No. Good stuff, though. That's a great question. I actually really like that one a lot. Very, very insightful. Shawn, who do we have next?
Okay. Well, next up, we've got Carolyn.
All right. Well, Carolyn, a veteran here at Questions After Nightfall. Welcome back. How are you?
Hi, guys. This is Carolyn, and I'm in San Antonio right now.
All right. Well, welcome back. Glad to have you again.
Glad to be here. My question is also about a ring.
Okay.
But it's about Saruman's ring. And I'm hoping you haven't covered it on one that I haven't listened to yet. So in the Council of Elrond, he says, I am Saruman the Wise, Saruman Ringmaker, Saruman of many colors.
Right.
Yep.
So I'm wondering what I have my own theories, but what is the nature of the ring that he made?
Mm-hmm.
Where did he get that information from? Was a Palantir possibly in the way that he got that information?
Okay.
And then I also, in the foreword of Fellowship, Tolkien actually says, Saruman, failing to get possession of the ring, would, in the confusion and treacheries of the time, have found in Mordor the missing links in his own research into ring lore, and before long, he would have made a great ring of his own, which would challenge the self-styled ruler of Middle-earth. So that would mean that, obviously, he did not make a great ring yet.
No. This would be a lesser essay in the craft.
Exactly.
Right. And we did talk about this in an episode that has been recorded, but that has not been released as of when we're recording this.
Okay.
And that's exactly where we landed, isn't it, Alan? We said that he had actually made his own ring. It was a lesser ring, but he was working towards making a great ring. Absolutely.
He absolutely was, yeah. At this point, it is just going to be a lesser ring. It's an essay in the craft, and we see that he has one, of course. It says, I rode to the foot of Orthanc, got to the stair of Saruman. He met me, led me up to his high chamber. He wore a ring on his finger. So we know that he's, wearing the ring. And then, of course, he calls himself Saruman Ringmaker. So,
and if anybody's going to do it, it would be Saruman, because he's the one who has studied the ring lore more than anybody.
Yeah. He has access to that information.
He has access to it. He has the knowledge. He's enough like Sauron in their origin.
Quite.
As much as that's worth, they both started out as Maiar of Aule. So he has the smithing background, the crafting background. So yeah, he has the capability, and we know he has the desire, obviously, because he wants the great ring. So he wants the one ring, excuse me. So yeah, he definitely made a lesser ring. Although, Carolyn, I'm really glad that you brought up this question, because when we talked about this a few episodes ago, we did not look in the foreword to the second edition, where Tolkien says this about how he would, before long, he would have made a great ring of his own with which to challenge the self-styled ruler of Middle-earth, which Carolyn
that might be something we want to throw into the postscript, actually. If we
I don't think we need to at this point, because we've got it here. But
that's true.
But yeah, that's a really great addition to that conversation.
That really is. I agree. Well, that was a great question, Carol, and good opportunity to dig into that one. Shawn, who do we have up next?
Next up is Casey.
Casey, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Good to have you.
Okay, so I've got a little bit more of a easier one for you guys. it's kind of similar to your answer to Simon's question, I think it was. So I recently saw something online. An author, a fantasy author, tweeted at Barnes & Noble that Tolkien was taking up 3.5 shelves. And it, yeah, it was just making me think about, the fact that today he's still, the number one name in fantasy. And he's so big. People are obviously still buying him. And what you guys were talking about, just with the community and everything that's been built and is currently still going with, with around Tolkien and his works. I want to hear from you guys what you guys think resonates with people so much with Tolkien's works that he's still today, the top dog.
That's a very good question. And I actually found that quote real quick because I want to make sure we get it right. This has been a little bit controversial, I think. It's an author by the name of Fonda Lee. She's written a series of books called the Green Bones Saga. And she says, this is what modern fantasy writers are up against. It's a photograph of a bookshelf at Barnes & Noble. In my local Barnes & Noble, most authors are lucky to find a copy of their book. Super lucky if it's face out. There are 3.5 shelves for Tolkien, 1.5 for Jordan. Here's who we compete against for shelf space. Not each other, but dead guys. So I think really she might have been making a good point right up until that last point when she just comes off as sounding really bitter about the fact that, we're alive and they're dead and they've got all this space. But, she's got a valid point that obviously Tolkien dominates the space. So the question then is why? Why is what he writes so resonant with so many people that even this long after his death, maybe especially this long after his death, his works are so incredibly popular and really unavoidable? I would say part of the answer is at retail. Part of the answer is just what's going to sell. Barnes & Noble is going to sell what people buy. And so I would say the reason there's 2 or 3 shelves of Tolkien is because they know they're going to sell those books and they might not sell as many of hers. And that's not a ding on her fiction, which I haven't read. It's just a reality of the marketplace. You're going to stock what's going to sell. But let's answer the question that was asked rather than the boring question about retailers.
Before we do, let me weigh in on that because you raised some really good points that I want to just talk about just a little bit here.
Sure, yeah.
The first, I think she does have a valid point.
She does.
And I think it has got to be frustrating for writers.
Oh, I can't even imagine
to see that.
Pouring your heart and soul and stuff and then getting like a sliver on a bottom
It's hard
shelf.
enough. It's hard enough to get published in the first place and then to get published and then see your book not supported, promoted, stocked. It's got to be incredibly frustrating. And as a person who has written like 4 short stories in my life, I have a very small stake in this, but somewhere down the road, would I write a book? Yeah, maybe. And I would, if I were in her position, I would feel that. Yeah. Well, I'm saying if I've always kind of wanted to write a fiction book. Yeah. I've just never had the discipline, but if I were in her, I could kind of see myself in that position and I could see that being very frustrating. There's a lot of entities that are responsible for that. The publishers for, maybe not taking as much of a chance on newer writers, the retailers, like you said, they're going to stock what sells, but it also kind of becomes a self-perpetuating situation where, what sells continues to be what sells because that's what's there.
That's what's stocked. Right. You're right. It's a circular thing, no doubt. Yeah.
Which is not to say that I think that Tolkien doesn't deserve to continue selling. Obviously, I'm doing this podcast.
Oh, of course.
But I can see it being very frustrating for writers. So I definitely think she's got a point.
Oh yeah. No, totally.
But I guess the question is, why is it that way? I think, it is probably just partly the publishers and the retailers just want to stock what sells, and it's easier than promoting new talent.
Right.
So anyway,
the buyers don't have to take the time to read that saga from, a new writer and decide if it's good enough or take a look and see, is it being marketed well enough? Right. They know that Tolkien is the easiest stuff they can sell. And obviously,
it sells without them having to sell it, I guess is another way to see it.
They don't have to do any work. They just put it on the shelves and it's gone. Right.
Yeah. So she does have a valid point. There are a lot of parties that are responsible for that situation. And it's definitely a tough situation for a new writer to be in. But getting back to the question of why is Tolkien still so enduringly popular? Well, you go first because I cut you off when you were about to give your answer to that question.
Just why is he so resonant? I think we've talked about this a little bit, maybe back when we talked about how people sometimes perceive his work as being childish or for children when, clearly it isn't. I think those who have read it and realized that truth, it's really resonant for us because there's so many truths that we see in these stories. And it makes me think in some ways of Tolkien's own philosophy and what he talked about in Mythopoeia and talking about how Lewis had thought they were lies breathed through silver was what myths were. And yet Tolkien had a better response about myth and the truth that is buried in myth. All right, so there's this passage in Mythopoeia that I want to tackle. I mean, really, you could read the whole poem because I think the whole work speaks to this idea of myth being a valuable, worthwhile vehicle because of the truths that it expresses. But here are some of those truths that he points out. I'm going to read one stanza. He sees no stars who does not see them first of living silver made that sudden burst to flame like flowers beneath an ancient song, whose very echo after music long has since pursued. There is no firmament, only a void unless a jeweled tent, myth-woven and elf-patterned, and no earth unless the mother's womb whence all have birth. The heart of man is not compound of lies, but draws some wisdom from the only wise, and still recalls him, though now long estranged. Man is not wholly lost, nor wholly changed. Disgraced he may be, yet is not dethroned, and keeps the rags of lordship once he owned. His world dominion by creative act. Not his to worship the great artifact, man, sub-creator, the refracted light, through whom is splintered from a single white to many hues, and endlessly combined in living shapes that move from mind to mind. Though all the crannies of the world we filled with elves and goblins, though we dared to build gods in their houses out of dark and light, and sow the seed of dragons, 'twas our right, used or misused. The right has not decayed. We make still by the law in which we're made. And I think those truths, even if we don't grasp them on a conscious level, this idea that we tell these stories and they give meaning to every single element that we experience in the world, from, you know, what he talks about there about the earth itself, the stars in the sky, all these just elemental things in our lives, they gain a much deeper meaning when we view them through the eyes of myth.
Yeah.
And what is the Lord of the Rings but a massive myth that explains so many different things?
Yeah.
And has so many truths in it. And I think we've talked about this, Shawn, that it doesn't matter what your worldview is. You don't have to line up with Tolkien to find truths in his work. I think everybody finds truths in his work.
And that's why his work is so enduring for people from all over the world, no matter
from
what
different cultures and different worldviews.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So that would be my answer right there, is those universal truths that people find, and that's why they're so resonant.
No, I think that's a really good answer. And I think that Tolkien's writing is a testament to the power of myth and the need for myth in our lives. And we live in a world where myths are not very, very popular. We've sort of conflated these two meanings of the word myth, you know, myth being, you know, a mythic story, a story with mythic power,
right?
True or untrue, with this other meaning of myth meaning a lie. And we've kind of confused those two. And I think Tolkien's work is a testament to the fact that myths can have truth.
Yeah.
And that they're important. And that even though, I guess where I was going a moment ago is that, you know, our society doesn't really value myths very much these days. And yet we still need them. And that's where Tolkien comes in. And
I agree.
I think you can see this by the tendency of a lot of modern fantasy, and I won't name any names, but a lot of modern fantasy is sort of dedicated to breaking down those myths, you know, sort of deconstructing deconstructing myth making. Yeah. And Tolkien's work doesn't do that. And so I think while there's a lot of great fantasy stories that do that, and I've got authors that I like who do that, but Tolkien's work fills a different need that I think people have, and I think people will always have. And I think the other thing that makes his work so enduring is the fact that when it comes to that myth making, and when it comes to, you know, those things like world building and immersion into a secondary world, I don't think anybody's done it better than Tolkien.
No,
I think some people
don't.
I think some people have come close.
Yeah.
A very few people have come close, but I don't think anybody's done it to the degree Tolkien has with history.
Not to that thoroughness, history and language and
yeah,
so many different elements to the story that all, I agree.
And so it becomes, it gets to the point where if you are a fantasy fan, at some point somebody is going to say to you, you really need to read Lord of the Rings. And even if it doesn't end up being your favorite fantasy book, like it is for us, you still you're going to read it and you're going to be impacted by it. And I think that's why it's so enduring.
The way it defines the genre. Yeah, absolutely.
It does. Yep.
Well, that would be our answer. That was a fun question, though. I really enjoyed that one.
That was
as well.
a great question. Thank you.
This has been a great series of questions tonight, really, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, let's see if that thread continues. No pressure on whoever's next. All right, Graham, fire away. What do you have for us?
Hi, this is Graham from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. It's great to be here, and thanks, guys, for bearing with me during my technical problems. I have one question for you tonight, which I think might be fairly short.
Yeah.
One of the things I've enjoyed about the podcast is your book recommendations. I recently ordered a copy of Ring of Words. In that book, the authors make a note, which I'd like you to comment on if you can. I quote, "Whether or not there's any truth in the suggestion, often made, that in his creative writing Tolkien brings particular enthusiasm to his descriptions of bad things, he certainly relished the task of working out the etymologies," and the quote continues. My question for you is, do you think Tolkien was especially good at, or derived special pleasure from describing bad things? Thanks.
Ooh, that's a very good question.
That is a really good question.
He certainly did put, I mean, as I'm thinking through things, the descriptions of, I'm thinking of a quote that might explain that. Shawn, you want to dive into this and start, and I'll pull something up?
Yeah, I'll just start thinking of some examples. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the incredible depth of detail we get with a place like the Dead Marshes.
Yeah.
Where when Frodo and Sam are going through the Dead Marshes with Gollum, you can see the faces in the water and you can smell the marsh. And you definitely, you feel like you're there. There's a very vivid description of that. There's an incredibly vivid description of Minas Morgul when they're like sort of at the right about to climb the stairs of Cirith Ungol. That's actually one of my favorite passages in the book, is when they're right there below Minas Morgul, and what's described there. I think that's where he uses the phrase a corpse light that shines from the tower, and it's just a very, very vivid passage. So there are definitely some very dark things that have very vivid descriptions. But I don't know that I think he's more enthusiastic about those descriptions than he is about his descriptions of like the countryside of the Shire. The Old Forest, which I guess is a mix of good things and bad things. But, we've spent so much time in book one and not too much in book two because we've been at Rivendell, but certainly in book one, we spent a lot of time looking at, that Arcadia, to borrow Wayne Hammond's word, of the Shire and all this beautiful countryside that they pass. And it's some of the most descriptive stuff imaginable. In fact, the other thing that some of Tolkien's critics say about him is that he spends, what do they say? Like he spends 3 pages describing a tree,
Right. That's true.
So he's got a particular enthusiasm for sort of the beauty of nature too. I don't think he's more enthusiastic about his descriptions of bad things. I think he is equally descriptive of certain bad things, especially those that seem to have a personal connection to him. Again, I'm thinking of Dead Marshes and Mordor. These are places that were very influenced by his personal experiences at the song. Yeah. So I think he probably just had some stuff he needed to get out through those descriptions.
Sure.
And so that's why that happens. If there's a reason why it seems more enthusiastic to certain people, and I don't think that the authors of Ring of Words are saying it. I think they're saying whether or not there's any truth in the suggestion often made by others. So I think they're just kind of reporting this opinion. I don't think they're saying they share it. But if it does seem that way to certain people, maybe it's just because Tolkien's work is generally so bright and hopeful.
Yeah. And so the dark stuff stands out.
The dark stuff stands out. Exactly. I mean, we always talk about the hope and the eucatastrophe, and, there's the criticism that Tolkien's world is too black and white and the good guys always win and nothing bad ever happens to them, which is ridiculous. But people say that. And, there is an optimism to his work, even though there is a sort of pessimistic undercurrent as well. And I think because of that, because of the brightness, I think the darkness stands out, as Alan said.
I think there's one other bit, though, that I want to bring in. When the question was asked, it made me think of a passage in The Hobbit. So I'm going to go back to The Hobbit, and we're going to go back to A Short Rest. And here is an interesting thing that I think might actually give us some insight.
Where
you know where I'm going, huh?
I do. Yeah, that's a good catch. Good. Okay.
The narrator says, "Now it is a strange thing, but things that are good to have and days that are good to spend are soon told about and not much to listen to, while things that are uncomfortable, palpitating, and even gruesome may make a good tale and take a deal of telling anyway." I think that might be a reason why we see some of those dark things described in extensive detail, because the good things are things that we're familiar with, and he might not have to describe them in such a lengthy style. They don't make as good a tale. And, instead we get a tale of the fight between Fingolfin and Morgoth, and we get a description of what happens basically to Fingolfin's body. I mean, these are gruesome things. These are uncomfortable things, but boy, they make a great tale, and they take a deal of telling anyway.
That's true.
So I think that passage is the first thing that came to my mind.
That suggests that he is more enthusiastic about describing those bad things,
or at least more willing to dig into it and not to shy away from it. Is kind of what I'm thinking. Because I hear what you're saying. He does spend plenty of time describing beautiful forests, and he spends plenty of time describing the countryside of the Shire and good things as well, noble things, the charge of the Rohirrim at the Battle of the Pelennor Fields.
Yeah.
That's an incredible description, but it's a good thing.
Faramir and Eowyn, they're vivid
goodness.
images of their, as they're falling in love right there in the Houses of Healing. I mean, they're images that just stand out to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's one of the best things imaginable, two people falling in love. So
yeah, great stuff.
It's interesting. That's actually really interesting. And I'm really glad you thought of that from The Hobbit, because that does kind of give us an idea of why it's worth spending some time on the bad things, because they're kind of alien to us, aren't they? I mean, if we're lucky, we don't experience those things in our lives. And so they make a good story.
Absolutely. Well, that was a great question. It gave us a chance to really explore a couple things.
Yeah. Thank you, Graham.
We don't have time probably for a full round 2, but I think we do have time for at least a couple of more questions. Jim got his hand up first. So, Jim, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Fire away. What do you have for us in round 2?
Well, it's kind of a follow-up to the Tom Bombadil question. Has to do with the flight to the ford.
Oh, okay.
The Ford of Bruinen, and the fact that you have Frodo crossing on top of the elven horse, and he's standing off the Nazgul all by himself. And then a flood gets released by the river, and Gandalf apparently has time to do some ornamentation on the waves, so they look like riders and maybe boulders, or maybe they're real boulders, who knows, and flames. The thing is, whole other topic. The thing is, we know from The Hobbit that it's many a weary hour from the ford to Rivendell itself, and it's not all that easy to find. So how did Elrond know to release the flood? Does he have a ring doorbell over there at the ford, or does he have
a little security monitor?
A little wireless setup or something like that. And if Gandalf has only lately gotten there, then how does he know to be close enough to be able to work his magic on the waves?
Okay, good question. Shawn, I think my first response would be that I think we talked about this a little bit. Maybe it's more automated than you think. I mean, it's clearly the river is under Elrond's command. We know that. And you wonder, is this something that's just automatically going to happen, and that Gandalf's touch is only really the extra? I mean, that's kind of my... Well, let's answer the first part of the question first, is how does he get there? Well, he's on an elven horse, so the elven horse is going to know the way. So I'm not worried about that part. Glorfindel's horse clearly is going to know how to get to Rivendell. So getting him there, getting Frodo there isn't the issue. But here's Gandalf's answer to Frodo's question about the flood. He says, the river of this valley is under his power, talking about Elrond, and it will rise in anger when he has great need to bar the ford. So to me, that suggests an automated response. Yeah.
Can we read the next sentence, Alan? Because I think that underscores the automated response.
Absolutely.
As soon as the captain of the Ringwraiths rode into the water, the flood was released.
Yeah.
That suggests that there's some sort of trigger. The Ringwraiths ride in and the flood is released. It doesn't say that as soon as the captain rode in, Elrond released the flood.
Right.
I think there's some sort of trigger, spiritual tripwire.
Maybe that's the name of maybe that was the name of the Lord of the Nazgul's horse. Trigger. Just kidding. Okay, sorry. Oh, that was bad.
Yeah, it was. It was terrible.
But yeah.
But I liked it.
I'm glad it wasn't the spiritual boulders question, because then I'd have to be breaking into the Shrek thing. That's a nice boulder. I like that boulder.
Didn't stop you, did it?
No, it didn't. That's exactly why I did it.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's somewhat automated. Elrond has some sort of magia on this area. Nice. What we would call magic on the river, and it rises up automatically. I think it also says, does it say there that Glorfindel knew that this was going to happen? Or did we just say that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because Frodo asks about, who did I see there? I don't understand what I saw. And there they hastily kindled fire, for Glorfindel knew that a flood would come down if the riders tried to cross.
There you go.
And then he would have to deal with any that were left on his side of the river. Yeah.
So that also suggests that this is a standing defense of some kind that Glorfindel knew about.
He was aware that it was going to happen, right?
Now, as for the question of how Gandalf was able to add his touches, I mean, maybe he's just got, maybe it's just something Gandalfish, something.
Yeah, well, he's got a ring of power, so there's
some way that the rings of power can work together. Yep.
Yeah, maybe. Wonder Twin powers activate. Form of spiritual boulders.
Form of great white horses and spiritual boulders.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm not as troubled by Gandalf, honestly, because he's Gandalf.
No.
And I think that for Elrond, it's the automated thing.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I think we do have time for one more. Demay, you have your hand up, I think, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you.
Okay, this is actually more a question for Shawn.
That's okay.
Okay.
Simply because he mentioned that in your crossover with Corey Olsen on the Exploring the Lord of the Rings, that he had no, minimal experience with the Lord of the Rings online game. And I know that, Alan, you have more experience being a lifetime member and all that.
Right. Haven't played it in a couple of years, but yes.
And when I said minimal experience, I meant none before that night.
So anyway, Shawn, my question is for you is what you saw, how did you like it?
Oh, good question.
It was really cool. And I loved, so for folks who didn't see that, either who are here now or who are listening in the future when this releases, you can actually find it on Signum University's Twitch channel. And we'll probably go ahead and put a link up to that so folks can find it next to this episode. So Corey and his team, he had a few folks with us. They took us to a few places. They took us to the Prancing Pony in Bree. They took us to Rivendell, and they took us to the Lonely Mountain. And so for me as a first timer, a fourth place, we also went to Lake Town.
Yeah.
So,
which was new to me. I'd never seen that. Right.
Okay. And it was the new Lake Town, which is never even described in the books. And that was really neat because it was all very, very post-Smaug. There's a lot of like dragon imagery, dragon iconography on the suits of armor and things like that, which is really cool. For me as a first-time user, it was really cool to get to see a nice cross-section of Middle-earth architecture. I got to see Bree, which is human and a little bit hobbitish. I got to see Lake Town, which is, another kind of human architecture or mannish architecture. Rivendell, obviously, a very elvish place, and of course, Erebor, very dwarvish. And I really got to see the difference in architecture there. And one of the things I said on that Twitch stream was when we went through Rivendell, I was surprised at how Rivendell looked completely unlike any other conception of Rivendell I've ever seen before. Yeah. Obviously, having seen Peter Jackson's movies, I think that was an area that Alan Lee had more to do with. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken. And that Alan Lee sort of version of Rivendell, I think, is very influential out there now. This is totally unlike that, and yet it's still very elvish, and it still feels like an elvish place, and that was really neat for me. Yeah. So that was really cool. In terms of like the gameplay, I didn't really get much of a feel for that because we were really just kind of running around and looking. Sure. But it was a super cool world that I could really see myself having a lot of fun,
spending
a lot of time in it. And
Yeah.
That's exactly why I still haven't
If
downloaded
only you
it.
had any time to give to it, right?
Yeah. Full disclosure, I have played MMOs in the past. I was a really big EverQuest player back in the back right around the turn of the century. I think I started around 99.
Turn of the millennium, right?
Yeah. Millennium too. I think I started that around 99 and I played maybe till about 2003. So I definitely have experienced MMOs and I know how I get with them. So that's partly why.
Unless you want the Prancing Pony podcast to suddenly become a solo show, it's probably not a good idea to introduce Shawn to the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, it's just where I am in my life right now. I don't have time, but it's still there. And I would love to do it if I had the time.
I agree. DeMay, you've got a quick follow-up for us?
Yeah, well, I just really wanted to say, Shawn, that I've never played an MMO, so I didn't know how addictive they could be. And I'm an old woman, and I had to learn how to use a mouse and all that stuff. And it's been actually for me a delight, and I'm glad you had a chance to at least look around. You need the tourist class as opposed to the guardian or the hunter or the warden class. You need the tourist class. So don't be afraid to.
Okay.
No, what you need to do is to write to Standing Stone Games and ask them to create one for you.
There you go.
So you can just walk around without getting killed by all the mobs. Agreed.
Honestly, I am thinking about downloading it once we get through the holidays and maybe I have a little bit more time. I'm thinking about downloading it and creating a character just so that I can do more of those exploring the Lord of the Rings sessions because that was so much fun.
Yeah.
And that would just be the challenge is like, can I do that and then not end up spending way too much time playing the game? It's super cool. It is super cool. Yeah. And I loved it. And if nothing else, I'll be watching a lot of the Signum Twitch feeds so that I can see Corey and his team go through there.
It's a lot of fun. Well, I think we have time for one quick one. Ed, you've got your hand raised. Go ahead. What do you have for us?
Yeah, it's not even a question. I just wanted to tell you a little story. I went to a local Renaissance fair this summer, and I was wearing my Prancing Pony T-shirt.
Yeah.
And I went into one of the booths, and the woman there said, "Oh, what's the Prancing Pony?" I said, "It's a podcast." She said, "There's a Prancing Pony podcast?" I said, "Yeah, it's all about Tolkien." She said, "Oh, I've got to look that up as soon as I get home." So I think everybody should wear their Prancing Pony merch everywhere they go, really, to promote the podcast.
Certainly to things like Renaissance fairs
and any other
comic conventions.
Places. Yeah. See,
where the nerd population is greater than 10%, please wear your Prancing Pony podcast merch.
That's a good idea.
Please do.
That's all I have.
Yeah.
I've actually done that to the last time I went to a Renaissance festival, and I did get a few questions about it. And and that's always neat because people say like, "Oh, is that really a podcast?" And I say, "Yes, it is," and I host it.
Yeah.
And that's always kind of neat. So
I've worn mine to Disneyland because at least there are some geeks there, and sometimes you get Tolkien fans, but I've only had a couple of people ask, so I'll keep wearing it.
If you're at Disneyland or Disney World and somebody comes up to you and starts talking to you about the proper way to pluralize dwarf, whether it's dwarfs or dwarves,
I'll talk about that. I've got some
at Disney.
words.
At Disney, it's 7 dwarfs. But no, thank you, Ed. Thanks for wearing that.
Get the F out of here is what.
I like that. That's great.
I don't know how I just came up with that, but
that's really good
too.
That's awesome.
Yeah, dwarves, get the F out of here.
Get the F out of here.
It's not plural.
Fantastic.
All right.
Well, seriously, thank you, Ed, for wearing the shirt to the Ren Fair. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, folks, please do that.
Absolutely. Well, folks, thank you so much for the great discussions, the great questions. Tonight was a really great episode. We had a lot of fun. So thank you for joining us for Questions After Nightfall. And we hope that you can join us again for the next one in the first quarter of next year. And folks listening at home, that is going to wrap it up for the Prancing Pony Podcast for 2019, for this entire decade, one might say.
Wow. That's a really dramatic way to put it.
We could talk about it. We're entering our second decade. Yeah.
Very. Yeah. Now I honestly can't believe it's already that time of year. No. I know this is such a horrible cliche, but this year has flown by. But we are taking the next 2 weeks off to enjoy the holidays with our families. But we want to wish all of you a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, Happy everything else from Alan and me at the Prancing Pony Podcast.
Indeed. I couldn't have said it better myself, Shawn. Folks, we will be back again on January 5th, and we'll be getting back to the text in that episode with the first part of Book 2, Chapter 3, The Ring Goes South.
Although I think it's safe to say that the ring isn't going to be going anywhere in that episode.
No, not
We
yet.
still have to figure out who's going with Frodo and Sam, unless Elrond is just going to kick the two of them out the front door.
I kind of like that idea, actually. That would be a lot of fun. Bah, humbug, now get going to Mordor.
Yeah, there you go.
Not going to have it quite like that. Yeah. We are going to be taking a couple of weeks off, but we want you to remember that the talk continues all night long at the Prancing Pony.
That's right. We've always got lots of discussion happening in our social media spaces. At our common room on Facebook, you'll find comments, questions, corrections, and more on every episode, as well as updates from us throughout the week. Just look for the Prancing Pony Podcast on Facebook and click the like and follow buttons.
And now we have another common room on Reddit. You can find great discussions there at r/PrancingPonyPod. As always, you can find us on Twitter and on Instagram with the handle @PrancingPonyPod, so follow us wherever you might be. And if you like us, please share us on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, any social media channel, or anywhere else you can find Tolkien fans like we talked about at Ren Fairs and Disneyland.
That's right. And if you really want to let the world know your feelings about us, give us a review on iTunes. The more reviews we have, the more visible our podcast is. That helps others find us and this great community of Tolkien fans we've built together.
And finally, if you would like access to exclusive content like postscripts, quarterly specials, PPP swag, and more, check out patreon.com/PrancingPonyPod to find out how you can join the fellowship of the podcast. As always, folks, we want to thank each of you listening and also give a very special thank you to our patrons at the Kierdan's contribution tier, some of whom are here tonight. DeMay in Alaska, James in Virginia, Tamsin in Minnesota, Emily in Texas, Chad in Texas, Lance in New Jersey, Paul in Colorado, Jerry in Texas, Bruce in California, and Mario in Utah. Thank you all very much.
Make sure you don't miss a single episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. Subscribe to the show through iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your comments and, most of all, your best questions and even corrections to the answers we've given today to Barliman at theprancingponypodcast.com.
Barliman's not always punctual with the mail, but we'll get back to you as soon as we can, and your comment or question may be featured on an upcoming show.
Well, this has been far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners, but until next time.
Farewell, friends.